Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about using VoiceThread for engaging asynchronous activities. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll talk to you about how you can incorporate the tool VoiceThread into your D2L course, specifically for use in social sciences and humanities classes, as it relates to using it as an asynchronous activity. My name's Holly Shadiz. I'm an instructional designer at Kennesaw State University, and I specifically support humanities and social sciences. So I do a lot of course design for asynchronous online classes, and I try to incorporate the use of VoiceThread as much as possible. Over the next 15 minutes, like I said, we'll go through what is scenario-based learning briefly, why you should use VoiceThread, some case examples across disciplines, and best practices for creating VoiceThread scenarios, and then how to get started. After you've watched this, I hope that you will be able to describe the benefits of scenario-based learning in asynchronous courses, identify those best practices for creating VoiceThread activities, and then gain ready-to-use ideas for applying VoiceThread in different humanities and social sciences disciplines. So like I said, what is scenario-based learning? Well, it's where students are immersed in a realistic problem-solving situation. It promotes critical thinking and decision making, which again, I think is such an important concept and tool for the humanities and social sciences. And sometimes when we're thinking about creating activities, and especially when it comes to scenario-based activities, I think sometimes our brain goes heavily to nursing or something science related and not as often around a history class or a literature class. So these scenarios are ask students to analyze context, make choices, and reflect on those consequences, all while engaging a narrative framework. So it really encourages that participation. It's something that'll also provide instant feedback, which I really like about scenario-based learning, especially as it relates to VoiceThread. And I don't necessarily mean like instant graded feedback, but in a scenario situation, you're not relying on another person to necessarily wait a long time to give you an evaluation or to give you that feedback. And then again, it offers close to real life-based challenges, which again, in a humanities or social sciences setting, can be hard for students to gain, in an anthropology course, a geography course, when you are in that classroom setting. Students can't easily do a field-based sort of study or something like that. So this scenario-based learning allows them to kind of transport themselves or to see themselves in a character, talking about a literature course, a little bit easier. And why VoiceThread specifically? So VoiceThread is an asynchronous tool that allows instructors and students to comment and share via audio, text, and video on multimedia slides. So it's perfect for simulating real life scenarios and encouraging thoughtful multimodal discussion. It's also something that integrates very easily into D2L. It's supported on D2L, and there's a lot of different ways that you can use VoiceThread, including giving lectures. But we'll kind of focus more today on creating scenario-based assignments with using it. So I wanted to go over a couple case examples of how you could use VoiceThreads in different courses and in history and literature, to be specific. So in a history course, students might take on the roles in a historical debate where they respond to events from different perspectives. And I think this is a really good example of how a VoiceThread activity can really simulate a discussion post, but giving it a little bit of a deeper meaning. So in this situation, students take on roles in a debate about whether the US should enter World War I. So they're going to be different characters, and there's an intro slide, character profile, a specific debate prompt where it's an open-ended question, and a reflection slide. So again, you're like, well, this is kind of similar to a discussion post. It is. This is just one way that you could use VoiceThread, but it transports that student into a narrative a little bit more than a discussion post would, as well as the assignment instructions, the activities, they're all around slides, maybe imported PowerPoint slides. So it promotes a little bit of a deeper engagement and students being locked in onto something more than them just kind of reading a prompt from a discussion post. It also is a lot easier for students to be able to record an audio or video in VoiceThread than it is to kind of outside do it and have to import it into D2L as well. So an example of how you can have students create an artifact instead of just answering a discussion question would be this literature prompt. So it allows for students to use their own form of creativity, and it appeals to a variety of learners. So in this situation, a student investigates a morally complex character, whether that be, you would decide, is it over, you're reading a specific book and it's one character that everyone uses, or maybe it's kind of at the end of the semester and they can choose. But whatever that is, you set the scene, provide brief context, have a prompting slide, and then again, the artifact instructional slide. So in this situation, students would either write a letter from a character's point of view, they would create a digital or hand-drawn collage of images or symbols that reflect the character's psyche, or they would maybe curate 3 to 5 songs that express the character's emotional arc, right? And then once they create something like this and upload it on their actual VoiceThread, because they would be creating their own VoiceThread in this situation, they would record a 1 to 2 minute explanation of their creative choices and how they connect it to the text. So, and then comment on a peer's artifact, maybe with an alternative interpretation. So again, this kind of allows students a variety of ways to interpret it, whether that's they are more comfortable writing something, they're a little bit more visual and want to be able to create that collage of images, or, to them that musicality, creating the soundtrack, that's something that they find fascinating. But it all comes together with giving that explanation of their creative choices and how whatever they decided connected to the text. So those are a couple examples of, again, one that is a little bit more specific to something similar to a discussion post, but immerses that learner a little bit deeper. And then this one that does actually have them producing their own VoiceThread and kind of an artifact to show, to represent something that they've learned. So let's review a challenging scenario posed by this anthropology professor, Dr. Elena Torres, and we'll review her problem, the solution, and then I'll show you the scenario set up in VoiceThread.
Dr. Eleanor Torres is a seasoned professor of cultural anthropology at a large public university. Known for her engaging, discussion-heavy face-to-face classes, she has always prided herself on helping students connect anthropological theory to real-world situations. However, since moving her Introduction to Cultural Anthropology course online, she has noticed a troubling trend. Her students are not engaging deeply with the content. They complete readings, but discussion board posts feel formulaic. Case study responses are shallow. Most students aren't connecting theory to lived experience, and they're certainly not developing the cultural empathy that is central to the field. Dr. Torres wants students to practice anthropology, not just learn about it. But how can they simulate real-world application of ethnographic methods, cross-cultural communication, or ethical dilemmas without in-person fieldwork or spontaneous classroom dialogue? She needs an approach that allows students to immerse themselves in complex social situations, take on roles, and reflect on cultural nuances, all within an asynchronous format.
Okay, so we saw Dr. Torres's problem here, and I think that this is something that a lot of us can empathize with when it comes to asynchronous classes, especially in some courses that really rely on discussion. And there's only so much discussion-based posts that you can really do in an asynchronous course. So let's look at the solution that she's come up with.
In a conversation with an instructional designer, Eleanor hears about scenario-based learning and VoiceThread. The idea sparks interest. What if she could craft an interactive simulation where students must step into the shoes of an anthropologist working in the field? The instructional designer proposes a solution. Let's create a scenario where students are given a field assignment in a virtual village. They'll encounter situations requiring them to apply concepts like participant observation, cultural relativism, and ethical decision-making. They'll make choices, interact through VoiceThread comments, and reflect on how their responses would shape field outcomes.
Okay, so I'm going to show you how the VoiceThread activity in D2L and a couple little caveats to this. In an actual class, you use a real place. I'm not an anthropologist, and to be honest, didn't really have the time to do extensive research on anything, so I made up a location. But again, in an actual course, you would use a community that you've already learned about, that you've taught your students. And as well as this one it's pretty basic. I just wanted to kind of, in this 15-minute setting, give you an idea of what something like this could look like. But again, if I was creating this for an actual class, I would go deeper into taking pictures and not just kind of PowerPoint slides of an actual community and going deeper into the actual simulation of it all. And this is an example of a scenario that's more aligned with a discussion post alternative. And it's a good example of a part one assignment. So this is something that maybe I would do at the beginning of the semester. And then there'd be a part two that has students creating an actual artifact that reflects their understanding of the material, whether that be, oh, maybe they actually submit their own version of field notes, and then the other students have to review them and make comments on them, or maybe they are taking a map and putting a marker on a specific area that they're interested in and giving kind of their own little mini presentation on that. Things like that you could then extend into the VoiceThread activity. But I think this is a good example of kind of a part one discussion that just builds a little bit deeper, like we saw in that history course, that just adds a little bit to the narrative. So here is what it looks like in D2L. I start out with field notes from Aurora Village, a virtual ethnography simulation. So welcome to our virtual field assignment. You've been selected to conduct an ethnographic observation in Aurora Village, a fictional community deep in the Amazon basin. Through a series of cultural encounters, you will observe, reflect, and respond like a real-world anthropologist. It gives the learning objectives the assignment component. So students will just, this again, it's pretty basic, this one, leave a written audio or video comment on each of the scenario prompt slides, and then respond to at least two of your classmates' comments. So again, it's something that's easily integrated into D2L. It's just an external learning tool within D2L. And students are able to complete the assignment either directly in D2L. You can open it to a full-size tab as well. Um, and you're also able to, I've created it as an assignment, so it can be automatically graded once it's submitted, depending on what you want to do, or if it's something that, in this instance, I would review all the submissions and then grade them myself. But it's something that is, again, integrated within D2L, and students can go through, and it's kind of, the first slide is, hey, here's what you're going to be doing, questions to consider when you're completing the assignment. You'll be given 3 different scenarios where you need to reflect and respond to each situation. So again, like this one is a ritual observation. You witness a sacred ritual involving animal sacrifice. How do you respond and document this event? And then there's some prompting questions on there that students can answer. Again, language barrier, again, prompting questions. So your translator offers conflicting interpretations. How do you, what measures do you take to ensure cultural accuracy and respect? And then an ethical dilemma one. And students they can either leave a text comment, they can choose to do audio, they can choose to do video. This is where they would upload if they wanted. And then again, the last side is peer reflection and offer an alternative perspective or raise a thoughtful question. There's some prompting questions that are provided for students. So again, that's kind of an example of, hey, you kind of quickly want to do something that's a little bit different, that's a little bit deeper of a discussion than just going into those discussion posts. And I love doing something like that within VoiceThreads. And like I said, you could then go to a part 2 where they're actually creating an artifact. What are some best practices for creating a VoiceThread scenario? Well, first you're going to want to start with an open-ended, challenging prompt, right? You're not just going to want something that students can easily answer yes and no, which we know this. But you want to build in roles or decision points that allows for multiple perspectives. So again, that's something like in the history course, having students be prompted to take on different characters or something like that. You want to structure your scenario with clear introduction and context slides, followed by those questions or challenges. You want to encourage students to reply to each other, right? Because what's the point in doing this if they're not actually, well, that's not necessarily true, because depending on the scenario, maybe it is something that they just need to submit documentation or a recorded video, and it's really just for you to see. But in a lot of situations, it's important for students to be able to interact with one another. And that's something, that we see a lot in asynchronous courses, that it's very surface level interactions, especially with just like those discussion posts. So again, that's something with VoiceThreads that I like, because if someone's doing an audio or video recording, or they're having to upload something that they created, and it's a lot easier for those other students to see it and comment on it, I think that promotes interaction a little bit better. And then always consider accessibility. VoiceThread allows for captions and transcripts to be added. I think if you could see at the bottom of that page, there was a CC slide. So it allows for that, and that's really important when you're considering creating something on VoiceThreads. So how do you get started? Well, you want to identify a topic that would benefit from a real world context, right? Not everything needs to be a scenario, not everything needs to be in VoiceThread, but just those few examples that I showed you, something like that is a really good example of something real world context that would be beneficial for using VoiceThread. And then you want to create a scenario with multiple viewpoints and or branching decisions. And then create an assignment in D2L and add the VoiceThread as an external tool. And it'll give you the option. You're able to either do it as just a comment. So that's something in my example where it was more of a discussion based, I would have added it as a comment. But if it was something where I needed students to create, so like that example for the literature course, I would do it as an assignment where students create a voice thread themselves. And then upload your materials into VoiceThread assignment via D2L and provide students with clear expectations and a grading rubric. Again, because this is in D2L, you can add a rubric to it. And it, doesn't have to be on VoiceThread, but it's within D2L. And then always reach out to your IT department or instructional designer at your institution for assistance in setting up a VoiceThread, if you need any help with it. Well, that was it. That's all I have for you about creating voice threads for engaging asynchronous activities. Again, my name's Holly. If you have any questions, there's a QR code on there for Microsoft Form. Feel free to ask any questions, and I'll definitely get back to you. You can also shoot me an email as well at hshadiz@kennesaw.edu. But again, you're welcome to fill out just that questions on the Microsoft Form. But I hope that you got something out of this, if only, for a basic understanding of how to use voice threads for scenarios. I know it has really been helpful in my work and working with students in humanities and social sciences. So I hope that this has maybe prompted some ideas for things you can do in your course. And if you have, even if it's questions about, coming up with a scenario or, a specific activity instructions, I'm definitely happy to help with that. So shoot me an email or just fill out that form. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day.